Have you ever noticed that when some people are hurt, they do not get angry, they do not argue, and they do not try to prove they are right? Instead of reacting strongly, they choose something very different. They become silent. But that is not calmness, and it is not indifference. It is a deeper kind of silence, like when someone is still standing in front of you, but their emotions have already started to leave the conversation a long time ago. In this video, we will explore the psychology behind silence when someone is hurt, why some people withdraw instead of reacting, what is actually happening inside their mind, and why this kind of silence sometimes says more than words ever could. If you are interested in human psychology, emotional behavior, and the hidden sides of relationships, make sure to subscribe to the channel and watch until the end of the video, because the final part may make you see other people's silence in a completely different way. When a person becomes silent after being hurt, many people around them often think that the conversation has ended. But in reality, for the person who is silent, the dialogue inside their mind has only just begun. While everything on the outside appears calm, inside there is a complex stream of thoughts unfolding. They replay every word, every look, every small detail of the situation that just happened. They wonder whether they misunderstood something, whether they said something that made things worse. Their silence is not emptiness, but a space filled with emotions trying to find a way to be organized. Psychology shows that when a person feels hurt or emotionally threatened, their nervous system can shift into a protective mode. Some people respond by arguing, some become defensive, but others choose to withdraw into silence. This is not weakness, but a mechanism of self-regulation. When emotions become too intense, the brain sometimes needs to create distance in order to process what is happening. That distance can appear in the form of silence. What is interesting is that people who tend to become silent when they are hurt are often those who feel emotions very deeply. They do not only hear the words that are spoken, but also sense the tone, the attitude, and the things that are left unsaid. Because of this, a sentence that may seem ordinary to others can sometimes carry a very large emotional meaning for them. When that happens, their mind needs time to process all those layers of emotion at once. Instead of reacting immediately, they often choose to step back, not because they have nothing to say, but because they have too many things to say. And in that moment, they are afraid that if they speak right away, their words might be misunderstood or might hurt the other person even more. So silence becomes a way to prevent consequences they are not ready to face. Another aspect that many people do not realize is that this kind of silence is often accompanied by a very high level of self-awareness. People who tend to withdraw emotionally often spend a lot of time thinking about their own behavior. They do not only question what others have done, but also question their own reactions. They wonder whether they are too sensitive, whether they are overreacting. This process of self-analysis can continue long after the conversation has ended. However, this deep thinking can also make them more cautious about expressing their emotions. If in the past, every time they tried to explain their feelings, it led to arguments or misunderstandings, then their mind gradually learns that speaking up does not always lead to positive outcomes. Over time, the brain begins to prioritize another strategy, keeping emotions to themselves. This strategy is sometimes formed very quietly. There is no single moment when they decide that from now on they will remain silent. Instead, it is the result of many small experiences accumulating over time. Every time their feelings are dismissed, every time they are told they are being too sensitive, every time their explanations are misunderstood, their mind records another piece of data, and gradually a pattern begins to form. That pattern is very simple but very powerful. If sharing emotions leads to discomfort, then silence seems like the less painful option. So instead of opening up immediately, they learn to observe more and speak less. They pay attention to how others react before deciding whether it is safe to share something. This also explains why people who become silent when they are hurt are often described by others as hard to read. From the outside, their emotions seem to be kept very private, but that does not mean they do not feel deeply. In fact, many times they are feeling everything much more intensely than others might imagine. The difference lies in how they process those emotions. Instead of expressing them immediately, they process them internally. They think, they observe, they try to understand what truly happened. For them, understanding their emotions clearly is more important than reacting quickly in the moment. Over time, this way of processing emotions can make them appear very calm in stressful situations. While others react immediately, they tend to pause, observe, and think before speaking. This is sometimes mistaken for coldness, but in reality, it is often the result of many years of learning how to control their emotions. However, silence also has another side that is rarely discussed. When a person continuously keeps their emotions to themselves, the distance between them and the people around them can gradually grow, not because they do not want to connect, but because they are not sure whether opening up is safe. So they wait for signs that their emotions will be heard and respected. And when they truly encounter environments like that, something interesting often happens. People who used to remain silent a lot can gradually become more open. Not because they have completely changed, but because their nervous system finally senses something they have been searching for a long time, a feeling of emotional safety. Of course, everyone responds differently when they are hurt, and not all silence has the same cause. But psychology shows that behind many moments of silence like this, there is often a complex story of experience, self protection, and quiet efforts to maintain emotional balance. When a person becomes accustomed to keeping all of their emotions inside, a subtle change begins to occur in the way they perceive relationships. They do not only listen to what others say, but they also constantly observe whether the space is safe enough for them to reveal their emotions. In their mind, there is always an invisible measurement, whether what they say will truly be listened to or whether it will once again become a source of misunderstanding. Because of this, before opening up, they often spend a great deal of time evaluating the situation, sometimes far more than others might imagine. This makes them very perceptive observers. They notice small changes in tone of voice, brief pauses in conversations, or the way someone reacts when hearing about another person's feelings. Details that may seem unimportant to many people can carry significant meaning for them. Because for those who have repeatedly felt that their emotions were overlooked, every small sign of understanding or lack of understanding can determine whether they feel safe enough to share more. However, this very caution can sometimes create a distance that they never intended. When someone constantly observes instead of fully participating in the conversation, people around them may feel that they are keeping their distance or do not want to connect more deeply. This misunderstanding can make relationships more complicated because the silent person does not truly want to be distant, but they also do not yet feel safe enough to step out from the protective layer they have built. Psychology describes this phenomenon as a kind of emotional paradox. The more someone longs to be understood, the more cautious they may become about revealing their emotions. Not because they do not want to share, but because they have previously experienced the feeling of being misunderstood or dismissed. Those experiences leave an imprint on the nervous system, causing their mind to remain alert to similar situations in the future. Over time, this alertness can make them very skilled at resolving their emotions on their own. They think deeply, they analyze situations from multiple perspectives, and they often have the ability to clearly understand the motivations of both themselves and others. This is a valuable ability because it allows them to view situations in a more complete way and avoid impulsive reactions. But on the other hand, constantly handling everything alone can also make them feel as if they are carrying an invisible burden. When every emotion is kept inside to be analyzed, those thoughts can accumulate over time. They are not always fully released. Sometimes they are simply reorganized and placed in another corner of the mind, waiting for another moment to be understood more clearly. Because of this, many people who tend to remain silent when they are hurt often become very deep thinkers. They may spend hours, even days, reflecting on a short conversation. They try to understand what truly happened, what made them feel the way they did, and whether there might have been another way to interpret the situation. This process of reflection sometimes helps them grow emotionally, but sometimes it can also leave them feeling exhausted. An interesting aspect is that When people like this finally find an emotionally safe environment, the change can happen very slowly but very deeply. At first, they may only share small thoughts, emotions that are not too sensitive. They observe the other person's reaction, seeing whether their feelings are received with respect. If the experience is positive, they may gradually open up a little more. This process is like rebuilding trust step by step. Each time their emotions are listened to without judgment, their nervous system learns something new. Not every conversation about emotions leads to hurt. Gradually, the walls of silence that they once built to protect themselves can become more flexible. What is important to understand is that a person's silence is not always a sign of indifference. Sometimes it is simply the way they are trying to protect a very sensitive part of themselves. For them, emotions are not something that can easily be placed in front of just anyone. They are a deep part of their inner world that they are only willing to share when they truly feel safe. When we begin to view silence in this way, we can start to understand that behind many quiet moments in relationships are often complex stories of experience, learning, and the effort to protect oneself. People who become silent when they are hurt are not necessarily distant people. Many of them are simply waiting for something very simple but very rare, a space where their emotions are heard without being dismissed. When silence lasts long enough, it is no longer just a temporary reaction, but gradually becomes part of the way a person interacts with the world. What is interesting is that many of them do not even realize how this process happened. At first, they simply choose silence in a few uncomfortable moments. But over time, those moments accumulate and gradually shape how they respond to emotional situations. Silence becomes a familiar reflex, like a path the mind has walked so many times that it now feels natural. In relationships, this can create a very subtle emotional loop. When one person withdraws into silence, the other person may sometimes feel confused or even abandoned. They do not know what is happening inside the other person, and that lack of information can cause them to form their own assumptions. Some people assume that the silence is a sign of coldness. Others think that the other person no longer cares. And when these assumptions begin to appear, the way they respond also begins to change. Instead of approaching with curiosity or patience, they may become defensive or disappointed. This unintentionally creates more tension in the relationship. The silent person senses that shift, and it reinforces their old belief that expressing emotions may lead to conflict or misunderstanding. So they withdraw even deeper into their inner world. A new loop begins to form. This is why many psychologists believe that silence in relationships is often not a single person's issue. It is usually the result of a chain of interactions between both sides. One person learns to remain silent to protect themselves, while the other reacts to that silence in a way that gradually increases the emotional distance. Neither person truly wants to create that distance, but it slowly appears anyway. However, what is important to understand is that this silence is not the end of emotional connection. In many cases, it is simply a sign that someone is trying to protect a very sensitive part of themselves. They do not withdraw because they do not care. In fact, sometimes they withdraw precisely because they care too much. They are afraid that if they say something while their emotions are still too intense, they might hurt the other person or make the situation worse. One notable thing is that people who tend to become silent when they are hurt are often also people with a high capacity for empathy. They do not only feel their own pain, but are also very sensitive to the emotions of others. Because of this, they often try to avoid situations that might make someone else feel uncomfortable or attacked. Their silence is sometimes an effort to keep things from going out of control. But like many self protection strategies, silence also has its limits. When emotions are constantly held inside without the opportunity to be shared or released, they can accumulate over time. Unspoken thoughts, unacknowledged feelings, all of these can become invisible burdens that others cannot see. This does not mean that the silent person is doing something wrong. It simply shows that even the best protective mechanisms need space to adjust. Sometimes change begins with very small moments. A conversation where the silent person truly feels heard, a patient response instead of a quick judgment, A simple question asked with genuine care rather than pressure. Moments like these can create a new experience for the nervous system, an experience different from what they were used to in the past. When this happens enough times, the mind begins to update its old predictions. Instead of automatically assuming that sharing emotions will lead to hurt, it begins to recognize that sometimes sharing can also lead to understanding. This change usually happens very slowly. It is not a dramatic turning point, but a series of small experiences that gradually rebuild a sense of safety. So, when we see someone being silent in emotional moments, the most helpful thing is sometimes not trying to force them to speak. Instead, what may be more valuable is creating a space where they know that if they choose to speak, their voice will be heard. For many people who are used to handling everything on their own, the mere existence of such space can already be a very different experience. Over time, patience and understanding can help break the loop of silence that may have existed for many years. Not by forcing change, but by showing that emotional connection does not necessarily have to come with the risk of being misunderstood or judged. When that becomes clearer, the silence that once served as a protective wall can gradually turn into a door that the person inside finally feels safe enough to open.